Different time of day, different angle to get some sun on my face, although it's hot as hell where I'm sitting, and that's why I've got the sunglasses on. Also, another reason is I don't want to do this video, because it's a negative review of a writer I like very much. But I thought I'd do it anyway, for some reason that I thought of on my walk, and now I can't remember. Anyway, the book is Pal Joey by John O'Hara, one of my favorite writers, although I haven't read him in quite a while. I plan to do some more John O'Hara reading later this month. This fits into that event that takes place in September to read short books, which I guess I'm not going to participate in formally, but I am going to read a lot of short books this month because I already stacked them up. Pal Joey is most famous as a movie in 1957 based on a Broadway play starring Frank Sinatra and Rita Hayworth, which I've never seen and which is very different than the book. John O'Hara is one of the greatest short story writers of the 20th century, probably of the greatest short stories of all time. I was very enamored of his work when I started reading it, and I looked at the time. It was very easy to find used editions of his very popular collections of short stories. Like Cape Cod Lighter is one I remember the name of. There's several, and I don't think they're in print in their original collections anymore. But you can get the selected stories of John O'Hara. You can get a couple others. He wrote, mainstream stories about normal people in Pennsylvania and or New York. Other places, very American writer, classic American writer. Was called The Real F. Scott Fitzgerald by Fran Lebowitz. And he was writing a little bit later in time. But anyway, I can't recommend his books enough. And yet here I am going to not recommend one. So I could just leave it off, I guess. But I was very disappointed in it. It is a short novel. It is not a short novel. It is a collection of short stories that is marketed now as a novel. The Penguin Classics edition. I didn't do any screen caps for this, but anyway, that's okay. The Penguin, can't speak either. The Penguin Classics edition of Pal Joey contains not only the work, the prose work, but the libretto or the book of the Rodgers and Hart musical. Pal Joey book. But I got the ebook version. I mean, I got the audiobook version just because I happened to find it on the library when I was looking for something else. Here's a copy of it that. Okay, I guess there's no point in doing screen caps today because of the glare. I should have gone inside, but it's a selection of 14 pieces that ran in the New Yorker in late 1938 to early 1940. Roughly once a month or so, probably a little bit less than once a month there. Pal Joey is a singer, a crooner. And when we first meet him, he's in Ohio. He's way in the hinterlands, but managing to make a name for himself on local radio. He's writing letters to his more famous friend, more successful friend, who he owes money to initially in the beginning, and talking about his foibles on the road. After the first couple, he ends up in Chicago, where he spends most of the other 14 sections. They're vignettes. What could I compare them to? Okay, we already mentioned Fitzgerald, so I could compare them to the Pat Hobby stories by F. Scott Fitzgerald, which was a series of short stories he wrote about a hack screenwriter. Late in Fitzgerald's career, he invented this character of a hack screenwriter who who has adventures in Hollywood, at the edges of show business. And those are very good stories. I like them very much. Or kind of, I don't know, like Ring Lardner, or there's one other guy who did that kind of stuff. These are more like that than they are like the other John O'Hara stories I've read. I believe they're humorous stories. Well, they are mostly humorous stories. However, what gave me a hard time reading it, the issue I had with it, is the first two stories are much darker. And the character is therefore, is therein, I should say, in those two stories, set up to be just an awful human being. Which is fine. Fine subject for a novel. Fine subject for a John O'Hara character. He is in one town. He manages to hook up with a chick who's kind of like a groupie. He calls the girls mice. There was a little mouse in the corner checking me out. He's unlikable. And he hooks up with her. He uses her connections, and I think probably goes on the road with her, sort of elides that part to his friend, kind of bragging like, "Don't get into my personal life and make me tell you what I did for those 3 days on the road with her." Anyway, so they clearly have a sexual relationship. He gets to the bigger city. He gets a little more successful. He meets other women he'd rather go out with. She calls him up one time out of the blue after they broke up and asks him for $50, and he doesn't give it to her, and he says, "I'm not going to give you that money," and so she hangs up on him, and he's like, "What's her problem?" Then later he goes, "Well, I guess I'll give her the money." Don't know what she would want it for, and then but then he finds out she's left town, and so it's clearly reading between the lines, clearly she asked him for money for an abortion, and he wouldn't give it to her, so she ran off and arranged it some other way. But he's either, and I'm really not sure at this point as I think back on it, he's either just extremely obtuse, which is possible, or he's lying to his friend and saying he doesn't know what the money is for. So, but it is possible that he's so obtuse because he's not a bright man. And he's very vain and superficial and stupid, and he might not have ever put two and two together of why, but I think people reading the story at the time would have known that this was the price for an abortion, and this was why she behaved on the phone the way, demanding the money, and then slamming down the phone and not talking to him again once he refused her. So he's that kind of person. And he gets involved with a rich woman in town whose father runs the radio station, all kinds of stuff. Eventually gets run out of there. And I thought, okay, so this is going to be a story of a rotten, narcissistic person, like Sammy Glick, or from What Makes Sammy Run by Bud Schoberg, or Sidney Falco from The Sweet Smell of Success, the great movie that I love so much with Tony Curtis and Burt Lancaster. Just a showbiz sleaze with no conscience, and this will be his comeuppance. And in a sense, it is what happens. But these pieces were written occasionally. They're short stories about one character. They don't go in any particular direction. So I wish, had I known that going in, I might have enjoyed them more. But I'm reading along, and they're just getting kind of like more funny and sort of anecdotes that don't really add up to anything. There's one where he's getting free food from a diner, and he, every night or almost every night he goes to this diner, and he figures he hangs out there, and the guy will give him free food, and he's mildly curious to why this is happening, and then it turns out it's really got nothing to do with him. It's just the owner of this diner is doing a compassionate thing for one of his employees that is not that is, in his late decline, mental decline, but it doesn't really have anything to do with anything except the incidents of that own story. So it doesn't build to any kind of revelation or anything. Like for example, Alfie, the Michael Caine movie from the '60s, where it kind of builds up to this character having some kind of revelations about themselves, and maybe that is the point. At the end, he's much worse off than the beginning. He gets all the bad breaks. Just ask him. He doesn't have luck, and his friend he's writing the letters to is getting more successful. But most of the stories are just humorous, which I felt kind of cheated based on the first couple, which were seemed to be leading towards something, a really terrible person, whereas the others are just about really kind of a dumb person. So I felt, like I said, I felt confused or cheated by the way that was done. Because of the movie, because of the Frank Sinatra movie of that era when those big musicals were very popular, and this was written by Rodgers and Hart, Rodgers and Hart were the precursors. Hart was the collaborator that Rodgers had before Hammerstein. So a big team. John O'Hara actually pitched the series of stories to them and wrote the libretto or the book for the musical. Changed it quite a bit, I think. I haven't watched it, and I'm probably not going to watch it, but although Rita Hayworth is in it, and she's always great, it might be worth it to see for her. Frank Sinatra seems too old to play this character, but that's movies for you. Didn't like it. I'm not going to hold it against John O'Hara. I guess the reason to make this is to say, if you're going to read John O'Hara, do not read Pile Joey first, because he has so much better stuff. So many great short stories. I would start with any of those books of short stories or the selected stories of John O'Hara. And read those instead. They're all very short. They're just kind of like japes, most of them. And if you like reading about this kind of loser dude, but I just keep saying it over and over. He's set up as such a bad guy that more should happen to him, other than he moves through the rest of his life with little to no self-awareness of who his own worst enemy is. So it's not a novel, it's not a novella in any sense, because it really doesn't come to any conclusion. It doesn't really move very far from its initial situations of this guy who's probably going to end up drunk and broke and dead at 55 or something like that. But a lot of it's just very incidental. I guess these would have ran, I don't know what section of the New Yorker they would have run in, but the New Yorker started out as a humor magazine, and probably these were kind of amusing more than they were moving, the way John O'Hara's best stories are. So read anything but Pal Joey first, and give John O'Hara a try. Later in the month, when it comes in from the library, I'm going to review one of his other books, so we'll see what I think of him then.